Hey all, it's Matt, your average gamer, and this is my top 40 overpowered builds ranked in Elden Ring. This is one of the biggest videos, if not the biggest video I've ever done on my channel. We're going to start here at number 40 with the Sacred Relic Sword. Before we continue though, a quick shout out to ExpressVPN. ExpressVPN is the VPN I use and trust. If you want to keep your browsing safer and more private, be sure to check out the description below for 3 extra months free on a yearly subscription. Be sure to also comment your top 5 weapons, spells, and incantations. For a lot of holy damage, we have the Sacred Relic Sword, preferably +10. We're using the Erdtree Seal. You can check out the armor set. Ritual Shield Talisman, Sacred Scorpion Charm, Shard of Alexander. We have the Ritual Swords Talisman, the Holy Tier, Faith Tier. Let's jump into stats. For stats on this one, you do need 24 dexterity, but keep in mind that the Ash of War itself, which is Waves of Gold, will scale entirely from your Faith stats. So we have 70 Faith, 60 Vigor, 25 Mind. We're using Golden Vow and Hellish Fury for our buffs. The next one up here is widely talked about but rarely appears in my video. I'm starting to use this weapon more and more, and that's Siluria's Tree. It's chargeable, it does a lot of physical damage, and it has great range too. I'm starting to like this weapon a lot, that's for sure. It's definitely something I recommend trying, and if Holy ends up being good in the DLC, which a lot of people suspect it will at least play some kind of part, then Siluria's Tree is a good option because it does both Holy and a good amount of physical damage too. Besides the fact that this weapon is just outright fun to use. Now the other Crucible Sword, you can actually use the same exact setup for, the one with the Vortex, and you can get a really great amount of damage out of that too, but keep in mind that's a much closer option. This gives you a ranged option that's incredibly easy to use. By the way, all footage for this video, as always, is on New Game Plus 7. The majority of these journeys range between 30 and 32, mostly on the same rune level 150 character, which also means all the builds in the video are at rune level 150. So we've got a lot of great meta level builds for you. And in a second here, we're going to jump into equipment. For our equipment, well, after we fill up our FP, of course, we have the Siluria's Tree +10. We're using the Erdtree Seal. We have the Knight's Cavalry set on Altered. We have the Ritual Shield and Ritual Swords Talisman, Godfrey Icon, Shard of Alexander, Holy Tier, Faith Tier. Jump into stats. And for stats, we have 60 Vigor, 21 Mind, 26 Endurance. We have 54 Strength, which is giving us 81 Strength when we're two-handing it with the Faith Tier. We have 45 Faith, and we're using Golden Vow and Hellish Fury to buff this weapon up. At number 38, we have Marika's Hammer, which is another great holy option. I wanted to start with a couple different holy options depending on how it's going to be for DLC, and Marika's Hammer is incredibly powerful given the fact that it's physical damage, holy damage, and it does a lot of posture damage too. Another weapon that's incredibly enjoyable to try, I recommend trying it out. After you beat the game, you have the option for Sacred Relic Sword or Marika's Hammer, but you can duplicate a Remembrance to get yourself both weapons, and I recommend getting both as they both made this list. Let's jump into equipment. For equipment, we have Marika's Hammer +10, we have the Erdtree Seal, we have the Knight's Cavalry set on Altered, we have the Ritual Shield Talisman, Ritual Sword Talisman, Sacred Scorpion Charm, Shard of Alexander, we have the Holy Tier, Faith Tier. Let's jump into stats for this one. And for stats here, we have 60 Vigor, 21 Mind, 26 Endurance, 54 Strength, which will get us to 81 Strength when we two-hand this. We have 45 Faith with the Faith Tier. We're using Golden Vow and Hellish Fury to buff this. By the way, who else is pumped for DLC and watched the trailer a whole bunch of times? Be sure to comment your thoughts below. Can't even remember the last time I've been this excited for any kind of downloadable content. It truly is incredible. At number 37, we have Square Off, which you can combine with the Twinblades for a ton of poise damage. If you use them together in the charge attacks, they can both do 40 each for a combination of 80 poise damage. This is one of the few combinations that on New Game Plus 7, New Game Plus and beyond can still posture break with ease. Now, posture breaking becomes more difficult with every journey after New Game, all the way up to New Game Plus 7, where the enemies and bosses have around 30% more posture. An incredible combination that I recommend trying out. Square Off is heavily underrated. It's incredible on the charge attacks, 40 poise damage, and again, mix that with the Twinblades and you can walk into a fight doing 80 poise damage right from the beginning. Let's jump into equipment. For equipment, we have the Noble Slender Sword. We had it in Flame Art. We're running this as a Faith build with Square Off. We have the Twinblades on a Dagger, any seal for buffs, Fire Scorpion Charm, Shard of Alexander, Dagger Talisman, Ritual Swords Talisman, Stonebar, Crack Tier, Faith Tier. Let's jump into stats. For stats, we have 60 Vigor, 25 Mind, 25 Endurance. I was running this as a Faith build. It has a B, by the way, in Flame Art, so we have 75 Faith with a Faith Tier. We're using Golden Vow, Blessing Spoon, and Flame Grant Me Strength to buff this build. And now at number 36 we have Prayerful Strike. This makes for a solid tank build. It's honestly an amazing option if you want an alternative to the Blasphemous Blade that's a little bit more difficult to use. It's pretty much the perfect alternative for melee builds because you're going to heal a bunch too. And if you use Black Flame's protection with this and you go for a lot of defense, by the way, the Tree Sentinel set that we're using here is one of the best armor sets in the game for the weight. It's fantastic for this. You can turn this into basically a full tank build, and it does a bunch of poise damage also. By the way, as far as this build goes, you can get a lot of damage out of it if you want to go for a more buffed up version, but if you want to run it as a tank type build, as I mentioned initially, it's probably your best bet to run it as a tank build because you're going to heal back consistently. You want to make sure you have good poise. It has really good hyper armor in the Asher Ward too, and it can consistently heal you. It truly is incredible. This is one I recommend trying out. I know I'm going to say that a lot throughout this video, but if you're looking for that extra challenge and the Blasphemous Blade is just way too easy for you because you're spamming it from a distance, then use Prayerful Strike and you can even get some fun poise damage, critical hits, and a whole bunch of healing too with a little bit more challenging than the Blasphemous Blade. More of a challenge, and yeah, it absolutely is, no question about it. Goes well with the Great Stars, by the way, too, because that actually passively has a little bit of extra healing. I think it's around like 2% or so, so that's another nice bonus here. We're going to go over equipment. For equipment, we have the Great Stars with Prayerful Strike. We have it in Sacred Affinity, any seal for buffs. We have the Tree Sentinel set, Ritual Swords Talisman, Shard of Alexander, Ritual Shield Talisman, Erdtree's Favor +2, Holy Tier, Faith Tier. Let's jump into stats. By the way, you can run the Erdtree seal if you're throwing in Incantations as well. We have 65 Faith. We went for 32 Endurance because we got a lot of weight with the Tree Sentinel set on those some decent armor, 60 Vigor, and then we're using Golden Vow, and instead of Flame Grant Me Strength, we're using Black Flame's protection. And the next one up here at number 35 is the Venomous Fang. Now, this is a weapon that's really powerful in blood affinity at high levels, but when you're dealing with split damage and you're in between 125 and 150, it can be a little bit of a challenge in terms of getting the damage that you want to get out of it. That being said, it does a lot of poison, and if you throw it in blood affinity, you can get a lot of bleed too. Another one that I absolutely recommend trying out. It's really fun to use these Blood Affinity, Poison Affinity. For this, we have it in Blood Affinity, the Venomous Fang, and it doesn't really matter what Ash. I think we're using Royal Knight's Resolve. Any seal for buffs, White Mask, Rotten Wing Sword Insignia, Lord of Blood's Exaltation, Kindred of Rod's Exaltation, Ritual Swords Talisman, Thorny Tier, Fate Tier. For stats, we have 60 Vigor, we have 20 Mind, 26 Endurance, 16 Strength, 40 Dexterity, 45 Arcane, Golden Vow, and Flame Grant Me Strength. At number 34, we have Braggart's Roar. Probably my favorite roar in the game because I think it does actually more damage than a lot of the other roars in the game, but that being said, it goes well with Guts and Cold Affinity, especially with the status effect multiplier. Yeah, with Guts and Cold Affinity, you'll get a B in Strength Scaling anyway, and then you get that multiplier, I think because it's a Colossal weapon, it's around 3 times the status effect amount, so in just 1 or 2 hits with the Altered Charge attacks, you're very likely to proc Frost. This makes it not only a reliable choice for strength builds, but also a way if you want to add blood affinity to get bleed build up and whatnot too. Now it is going to be slower than your jump attack bleed builds, but it can be powerful that way as well. All in all, it's a powerful build. Roars are incredibly awesome because of that multiplier, and they can do a ridiculous amount of damage. Looking for a build to completely beat down bosses, then I recommend trying Guts Greatsword with Braggart's Roar in Cold Affinity. You will have a lot of fun with this one. Let's jump into equipment. For equipment, we have Guts Greatsword in Cold Affinity with Braggart's Roar, Highland Axe for the passive, any seal for buff. We hit 51 poise, Axe Talisman, Ritual Swords Talisman, Roar Medallion, Erdtree's Favor +2. We have the Spike Crack tier, Faith tier. Let's jump into stats for this build. And for stats, since we're still getting good strength scaling, we have 70 strength in case you want to single hand this. If you're two-handing it, you're going to be at 99 with these stats. We have 60 vigor, 23 mind, 28 endurance. We did hit 51 poise for most of these builds. A lot of these builds have 60 vigor too. And then we have 25 faith with the faith tier, so we can use Golden Vow and Flame Grant Me Strength for our buffs. At number 33, we have pretty much all of the dragon incantations in the game. They can be really powerful too. Keep in mind though that they have relatively large charge times, so they can take a little bit as far as casting goes, but they do a ton of damage if you want to run it with the Jellyfish Shield or 2 seals to stack the boost, and then they're also weightless too, so that's a plus. Yeah, they are a lot of fun to use, by the way. They're on my fun recommendation list, that's for sure. As far as the damage itself, the damage is incredible, but some of the faster moving bosses, especially once you get to the late game, it can be a little bit difficult to pull off the dragon incantations, and there's definitely some better options on this list later on as we get into the top 20 and so. Yeah, definitely inside the top 20 will be the most powerful spells and incantations in the game. For this, we have the Dragon Communion Seal and the Jellyfish Shield. We have part of the Tree Sentinel set on, Flux Canvas Talisman, Ritual Swords Talisman, Roar Medallion, Magic Scorpion Charm, Magic Tier, Faith Tier. Jump into stats for this one. And for stats, we are soft capped at 45 Faith and 45 Arcane, so good scaling with the Dragon Communion Seal. We have 55 Vigor on this one apparently, 23 Mind, 30 Endurance, 20 Strength, 14 Dexterity. And then for this specific build, I was using Golden Vow, Hellish Shibiri, and then I really like Glintstone Breath for the pure magic damage. It's a powerful incantation. And at number 32, we have Repeating Thrust. In my most recent video, I showed this highlight clip. I actually pulled this clip from that video, and this one is with the Iron Greatsword, which is excellent in blood affinity because it has really high base damage, and if you add it with Repeating Thrust, as you're going to see here on Mohg, it's absolutely absurd as he completely vanishes to the power of Repeating Thrust in the Iron Greatsword's awesome blood affinity. Speaking of which, I have an Iron Greatsword highlight video on my alternate channel. I'll leave that in the description below if you want to check out some more builds with the Iron Greatsword. In a second here, we're going to go over equipment, stats, and everything you need to know for this build. Yeah, this is absolutely awesome. Definitely recommend trying this one out. We have the Iron Greatsword and Blood Affinity with Repeating Thrust. We have the Dragon Communion Seal, White Mask. We have Melisand's Prosthesis, Shard of Alexander, Lord of Blood's Exaltation, Rottenwing Sword Insignia, Thorny Tier, Faith Tier. Let's jump into stats for this one. And now for stats, we have 60 Vigor, 20 Mind, 28 Endurance, 40 Strength, but when we're two-handing this, we have 60 Strength, we have 45 Arcane, so we have the soft cap there, 25 Faith, we're using Golden Vow and Flame Grant Me Strength. And as I mentioned, I'll attach that video if you're a fan of the Iron Greatsword. It actually has really good base damage and a lot of affinity, so I recommend trying out that video. It's a fun weapon to use too. Now for this next one at number 31, we have the Wing of Astel, which is an absolute large target destroyer. I mentioned some of the specific weapons like the Envoy's Longhorn, which we'll get to, and a couple different weapons and things like Pest Threads and whatnot, although Pest Threads didn't make it on this video, are good for larger targets in the game, and the Wing of Astel is no exception. It's fantastic for big targets. Yeah, definitely try this one out if you're looking for a pure intelligence scaling way to take down some of the bigger bosses in the game. I recommend trying out the Wing of Astel. It's an incredibly fun weapon to use, as are a lot of these. For the equipment, we have the Wing of Astel, any staff for Terra Magica, any seal for buffs, Ritual Sword and Shield Talisman, Magic Scorpion Charm, Shard of Alexander, Magic Tier, Faith Tier. Jump into stats. And for stats, for this one, for a lot of the mage ones, I only did 50 Vigor. We have 22 Mind, 20 Endurance, 16 Strength. We have 70 Intelligence. We're using Golden Vow, Hellish Shibiri, and Terra Magica to buff this. The next one up here I absolutely recommend for reliability. Now, it may not be the most overpowered one on the list, but Black Flame itself is incredibly reliable. You can use it from a distance, and other than me missing this dragon's head a lot in this clip, it is a fantastic and really powerful option for so many different bosses in Eldenring. Yeah, Black Flame is a personal favorite for me because it's something you can get really early game too, right? You can get it in Stormvale Castle very early with the Godslayer Seal, and once you get to 27 Faith or so, you can use the regular Black Flame for so many different bosses. The percentage damage, the fire damage, it's great. It's actually probably one of the best early game Faith builds that you can run. They can carry you all the way through the end game, and then even with Godfrey and Horalu and Radagon and their 0 fire resistance percentage damage, you're going to do a lot of damage with something like this. And again, that reliability because of the percentage damage. Bigger bosses take a lot more too if they have higher health pools. I'll mention this at the end too, and I believe I mentioned it once before, but as far as the comment section, I want everybody to post your top 5 weapons, spells, and incantations. If you want to do the top 5 of all 3 or combine them, it's up to you, because I'm curious as to what your top 5 are. Yeah, it doesn't have to be the exact builds or anything either, so you don't have to go into crazy description here. I'm just curious as to the weapons itself, spells, incantations. With my 1900 hours of experience in Elden Ring or so of what I have in it now, and I know a lot of people have 1,000, 2,000 hours in the game because it's amazing. I just want to see where it differs and what you think the top 5 are. I'm sure some of it's the same, but some stuff's going to differ too. For this, we have 2 Godslayer Seals so we can stack the boost. The Jellyfish Shield works if you don't have 2. You can hit 51 poise with the Endurance we have here. Flux Canvas Talisman, Fire Scorpion Charm, Godfrey Icon, Ritual Swords Talisman, Fire Tier, Faith Tier. Let's jump into stats. Now, these are the same stats as the Sacred Relic Sword, so you can take about 9 points out of Dexterity and put it back into Faith, so you'll get close to about 80 Faith, which is really good for damage. We have 60 Vigor, and then we're using Golden Vow, Hellish Shibiri, and the main thing that we're using here is the simple Black Flame Fireball. And the next one up here is Carian Slicer. This build's so good that I actually did this as a pure mage build. By the way, the Spellblade set won't boost this, I just had it on because it's relatively light. I didn't use a lot of buffs for this one, just Terra Magica and the Golden Vow Ash of War, and it does so much damage. Carian Slicer is really reliable too for the amount of FP it costs. Let's jump into equipment for this one. Yeah, truly a phenomenal spell and a very good thing to have on hand. We're using Lusette's Staff, Golden Vow Ash of War, Jellyfish Shield. We're using Carian Slicer, Spellblade set, but it doesn't boost this. Graven Mask, School Talisman, Magic Scorpion Charm, Ritual Swords Talisman, Magic Tier, Faith Tier. Let's talk about stats. For stats, we have 50 Vigor, we have 25 Mind, 20 Endurance, 20 Strength. We have 80 Intelligence, so we're getting really good scaling with Lusette's Staff. It's probably the best staff in the game at 80 Intelligence. We're using Terra Magica and Carian Slicer. At number 28, we have Black Flame Tornado. Now, this would make it higher on my list. I actually threw out the Godslayer sword, by the way. It was going to be in my top 40, but it ended up not making it because it has virtually no hyper armor, and this has no hyper armor either, but at least it does more damage than the Godslayer's Greatsword, and once the animation is pulled off, especially for some of the larger bosses in the game, you can absolutely shred them. Yeah, they nerfed the poise you get on the Godslayer's Greatsword, and ever since then, pulling off the entire animation, yeah, it does a lot of damage, but it's almost impossible to pull off, especially on some of the main or tougher bosses in the game. Definitely not on my top anything currently. I do hope they rebuff that one. For equipment, we have the Grave Scythe and Flame Art, Black Flame Tornado. Any seal for buffs, we're using the Tree Sentinel set. We have the Ritual Swords Talisman, Shard of Alexander, Fire Scorpion Charm, Urtru's Favorite +2, Fire Tier, Faith Tier. Let's talk about stats. For stats, we have 60 Vigor, 23 Mind, 32 Endurance. I was trying to get a decent amount of Hyper Armor for it, although that is very difficult because it has a lack of Hyper Armor. We have 75 Faith, and then we're using Golden Vow and Flame Grant Me Strength to buff this. At number 27, we have Burno Flame, which is essentially Firestorm from the Dark Souls days. It has a really high ceiling, can do massive fire damage, and it can destroy Malenia even on New Game +7 with ease. It's actually my main strategy and my recommended strategy for Malenia aside from Night Comet. Night Comet works really well too. Keep in mind she occasionally sidesteps it. For the most part, she won't see Night Comet, so you can continue to charge it and hit her from a distance. That being said, Burno Flame can knock her up in the air, and she has 0 fire resistance. Certainly one of the most fun ways of taking down Malenia, no question about that, although there is a ton of different challenging ways you can take on Malenia. She's an incredibly hard boss for most of us. That being said, Burno Flame is a nice cheese where you have to use essentially a couple casts each phase to take her down and just pay attention to Waterfowl. Yeah, she's super fun to fight, especially on New Game +7 where she has 2 phases that combine for around 49,000 HP, so it's pretty insane. That being said, she gives you a challenge pretty much no matter what build you use because Malenia has an incredibly powerful moveset. In all seriousness, if you struggle with Malenia, don't worry about it. A lot of people struggle with Malenia, especially the first time fighting her. No question about it. The first time I took on Malenia, it probably took me an hour or two. Actually, the boss that gave me the most trouble the first playthrough for me was Radagon Elden Beast, which took 3 or 4 hours, but she is very challenging. Yeah, she's no slouch, that's for sure. She's definitely always going to give you a little bit of a difficult time, and she does a lot of damage when she hits, too. Not even just on New Game +7 here, where bosses typically do more damage, but even on base New Game, her damage is kind of insane, and the fact that she can consistently heal, too, makes it even more challenging. That being said, I recommend the Burno Flame strategy because it can save you a lot of trouble, knock her up in the air, and honestly, after a couple tries, you'll probably get it. For this, we have 2 Giant Seals or 1 in the Jellyfish Shield. We hit 51 poise, Flox Canvas Talisman, Godfrey Icon, Ritual Swords Talisman, Fire Scorpion Charm, Fire Tier, Faith Tier. Jump into stats. And for stats on this one, we have 60 Vigor, 22 Mind, 24 Endurance. We did hit 51 Poise. We have 20 Strength, so we can use the Jellyfish Shield, 15 Dexterity, 80 Faith with the Faith Tier. Then we're buffing with Golden Vow, Howl of Shabriri, and then we're using Burno Flame for massive damage. By the way, Flame Grant Me Strength is good too if you don't want to take the additional damage. It's just going to amount to approximately 5% less damage than Howl. At number 26, we have the Bolt of Gransax, which is a crazy weapon for range. This is one of the most ranged weapons in the entire game. It's chargeable too, does good lightning damage, and it's really good and effective against most of the dragons in the game. And this is another one where it does have a fall off. I'll mention later in the video, Moonveil's kind of the same thing where it falls off after you get to around Journey 3 or later. But that being said, it's still reliable and it's incredibly powerful as well. Bolt of Gransax, preferably +10. Any seal for buffs. We did hit 51 poise. Godfrey Icon because it's chargeable, Ritual Swords Talisman, Lightning Scorpion Charm, Shard of Alexander, Lightning Tier, Faith Tier. Let's jump into stats. I didn't go for Howl on this one because the damage is decent from a range. We have 65 Dexterity, we have 60 Vigor, 25 Mind, 26 Endurance, 20 Strength, and then we have 25 Faith so we can use Golden Vow. And at number 25, we have the Starfist. The Starfist, especially with Craigblade, can do a lot of posture damage. You can add in the Glint Blades too for even more posture damage, and on top of that, the charged hits will do a ton of damage in general, and you also get a little bit of bleed build-up too. This is a fun one to try too. Now granted, fist weapons don't have a ton of range, that's why they didn't make it in my top 20. Some of the boss hitboxes they'll just miss for some reason, especially like the tree avatars and stuff in the game, but overall they can be really powerful. Now maybe not overpowered necessarily, but definitely reliable. Now we're going to jump into equipment for this. We have the Starfist and heavy affinity with Craigblade. We are using the Glint Blades as well, any seal for buffs. You can hit 51 poise with this endurance. Axe Talisman, Green Turtle Talisman, Ritual Shield Talisman, Ritual Sword Talisman, Spike Crack Tier, Faith Tier. Let's jump into stats for this one. And we have 60 Vigor, 23 Mind, 28 Endurance, 70 Strength because we're in heavy affinity, 25 Faith with the Faith Tier. You can hit 51 poise with this level of Endurance. We have Golden Vow and Flame Grant Me Strength for our buffs. At number 24, we have the Fire Swords. This is one of my favorite builds in Elden Ring, and this involves 2 Flame Art Bandit Curve Swords which get a B in Faith scaling. So on top of the crazy jump attack damage with the fire swords, and the fact that a lot of bosses in the game have 0 fire resistance or just take good fire damage in general, you can also run any incantations you like too, because you're going to have a really high faith stat, probably around 60 or 70. This is a solid build that's also incredibly versatile. For equipment, we have 2 Bandit Curve Swords and Flame Art Affinity with Flaming Strike. The Erdtree Seal or Giant Seal go well with this. Raptor's Black Feathers, Fire Scorpion Charm, Rotwing Sword Insignia, Melissa's Prosthesis, Claw Talisman, Fire Tier, Thorny Tier. The item that knocks him down is Margaret's Shackle. Let's jump into stats. A lot of people ask about that item. You can get it from patches towards the beginning of the game, and it works for Margaret and Morgott. We have 60 Vigor, 22 Mind, 24 Endurance. We have 70 Faith, 20 Strength and Dexterity, and we're using Golden Vow and Flame Grant Me Strength to buff this. And at number 23, we have Carian Grandeur. I know a lot of people expected this one to be up higher on the list, but I'm going to explain in a second why I have this one a little bit down further and outside the top 20. And the reason it's outside the top 20 for me is it's really based off hyper buffing. If you want to buff this up like crazy, the damage ceiling is incredible on it, much like Royal Knight's Resolve with the Giant Crusher. But that being said, since it's not a physical weapon and it is a little bit on the slower side, it falls outside my top 20. The weapon has no effect on Carian Grandeur, which scales purely with intelligence, so we just have the dagger at plus 25 preferably. Any stat for Terra Magica, Spellblade set will boost this. Godfrey Icon, Magic Scorpion Charm, Graven Mass Talisman, Ritual Swords Talisman, Magic Tier, Faith Tier. Let's jump into stats. And as far as stats go on here, for a lot of the mage stuff, I went for 50 Vigor, 22 Mind, 20 Endurance. We have 16 Strength, 17 Dexterity, 70 Intelligence, 33 Faith with the Faith Tier. And for our buffs, we're using Golden Vow, Hellish Rebury, and since we're a mage, we can add in Terra Magica as well. And the next one up here, we have a beloved weapon in Moonveil. A lot of people enjoy this weapon. On New Game, it's incredible. It does a lot of physical and magic damage, and it does good posture damage too. It is a very reliable weapon as well. And recently on my 3-part series, which was an early, mid-game, and late-game guide for Night Comet, I ended up using Moonveil as my backup weapon, and when I got to Radagon and Elden Beast, I used Night Comet on Radagon, Moonveil on Elden Beast. It actually did a lot of work on the final boss on base New Game. At the end of the day, too, it also has style going for it. I know a lot of people that like Moonveil just because it's kind of a stylistic katana. Hopefully in the DLC we get some more katanas. I'm hearing there's going to be 8 new weapon types, but I'm hoping they expand upon the katana class as well, because I'd like to see a really cool katana. Particularly a better strength katana would be cool. Let's jump into equipment here for this one. And for equipment, we have Moonveil plus 10, any seal for buffs. The Spellblade set will boost the beam part of this. We have the Shard of Alexander, Ritual Swords Talisman, Magic Scorpion Charm, Ritual Shield Talisman. Then we have the Magic Tier, Faith Tier. Let's jump into stats. And for stats, we have 60 Vigor, 22 Mind, 25 Endurance, 16 Strength. We have 40 Dexterity and 40 Intelligence because it's pretty even split between the two. 25 Faith with the Faith Tier. Also, if you're new, you can get Moonveil very early from the Magma Worm and Caelid, so that's something to keep in mind for a strong early game build. And at number 21, we have Wild Strikes, which is a very, very strong strength build. You can build up on a lot of successive attacks, put this in heavy affinity, and if you use the Rusted Anchor, you have pierce damage and also counter damage as well. And yeah, Radahn on New Game +7 here will go down in a flash to the counter damage and the pierce damage. He takes good pierce damage in general. Keep that in mind when you're fighting Radahn. He also is a big target, so anything like the Envoy's Longhorn, Ancient Dragon Lightning Strike works well too. Basically, this is pierce damage though, so you get that counter damage. You use the Spear Talisman too to increase it even further, though I have difficulty getting that to work sometimes. We have the Heavy Rusted Anchor with Wild Strikes on it, any seal for buffs, Rotten Wing Sword Insignia, Listens Prosthesis, Ritual Shield Talisman, Shard of Alexander, Thorny Tear, Fate Tear. Jump into stats. And for stats on this one, we have 66 strength. When we're two-handing it, that'll put us at 99, maxing our strength stat. We have 60 vigor, 25 mind. We have 30 endurance for this one, 15 faith, 25 faith with the faith tier. And then to buff this, we are going to be using Golden Vow and Flame Grant Me Strength. At number 20, we have the Envoy's Longhorn, which is in the exact same spot in two of my other bigger videos because I just feel like it's good at number 20. It does holy damage, but it absolutely shreds big bosses. This is also a personal favorite weapon for me too, because destroying some of the tougher bosses, especially shredding the dragons in the game with bubbles, is one of the most fun things that you can do in the game, and like the Blasphemous Blade, the Ash of War scales purely from your fate stat. 100% recommend using the Envoy's Longhorn. It is definitely a cool weapon to use, and you can make this fight, which is normally difficult, this fight is normally incredibly difficult, very easy with the Envoy's Longhorn, as he takes massive damage from the bubbles. It can even posture break him if you hit him enough with the bubbles, because apparently they do posture damage too. Yeah, I've even posture broke Mohg and a couple of other bosses using the bubbles. You do have to hit pretty consistently, make sure most of them hit, but overall the fact that they do any poise damage at all is pretty crazy, and with dragons you can take them down incredibly fast using this Ash of War. As far as all the bubble weapons, the small and big one only use one bubble, so the medium one's definitely going to be your best bet. I wish the big one we can blow as many bubbles as the enemies do, but unfortunately we're limited to one, meaning the medium one's the best one. For this we have the Envoy's Longhorn +10, we have the Erdtree Seal +10, we're using the Envoy's Crown, Ritual Swords Talisman, Shard of Alexander, Sacred Scorpion Charm, Ritual Shield Talisman, Holy Tier, Faith Tier. Let's jump into stats. And for our stats, we have 60 Vigor, 22 Mind, 24 Endurance. We have 80 Faith with the Faith tier, so we're getting really good damage out of this. You can also mix in some Incantations if you want to add variety to the build. Only 15 Dexterity, 20 Strength. We're using Golden Vow and Hellish Rebury to buff this Ash of War. At number 19, we have Sword Dance, which made it into the top 20 in this video because it is really good too. Now, Double Slash does beat it a little bit. That's actually going to be the next one. I'll explain the differences. However, Sword Dance is a little bit quicker, kind of easier to finish the animation because Double Slash is longer and still does really great damage. I'm actually going to end up showing the same boss again, Margit, for Double Slash, so you can kind of compare the two, but generally speaking, Sword Dance is faster and Double Slash can do more damage if you're able to get through the whole animation. Let's jump into equipment. For equipment, we have the Keen Nagakiba with Double Slash. We're using Bloodflame Blade, any seal for buffs, White Mass, Melissen's Prosthesis, Lord of Blood's Exaltation, Rotten Wing Sword Insignia, Shard of Alexander, Thorny Tier, Fate Tier. We're using Margit Shackle. Let's jump into stats. For stats, we have 60 Vigor, 23 Mind, 23 Endurance, or 25 Endurance rather, 18 Strength, 75 Dexterity with Melissen's Prosthesis, 25 Faith with the Faith tier. We're using Golden Vow, Flame Grant Me Strength, and Bloodflame Blade. And the next one up here, to no surprise, we're going to be showing off Double Slash. Now, Double Slash is a little bit longer than Sword Dance. I think Sword Dance comes out a little bit faster, and it does end also with the Slam Down for a lot of damage. But that being said, Double Slash is a little bit better, for me at least, as far as proccing bleed, but they're both pretty comparable, and they're honestly both very good. My suggestion on both, try out each one and see which one you like better. You can get them both fairly early game anyway. For me, I think Double Slash is a little bit better than Sword Dance. For equipment, we have the Keen Nagakiba with Double Slash. We have any seal for buffs, White Mask. You don't need the Raptor's Black Feather, Shard of Alexander, Lord of Blood's Exaltation, Melissen's Prosthesis, Rotten Wing Sword Insignia, Thorny Tier, Fate Tier. Let's jump into stats. For our stats, we have 60 Vigor, 23 Mind, 25 Endurance, 18 Strength, 75 Dexterity with Melissen's Prosthesis, 25 Faith with the Fate tier. Our buffs are Golden Vow, Flame Grant Me Strength, and Bloodflame Blade. And at number 17, we have Bloodhound's Claws. Claws are so much better after they receive the buff around 1.08 or 1.09, doing a lot more physical damage, and when you add in Bloodflame Blade, you can get a lot of bleed build up as well. If you're someone who's coming back to Eldenring after the Eldenring DLC trailer, and you remember launch but not much after that, you'll probably remember that Claws weren't that good. They're a lot better now, they've been buffed, they can do a ton of bleed build up, and the physical damage on them isn't bad either. Definitely give them a try, and there's so many different Ashes of War you can use with them too. For this, I think I had Impaling Thrust just for some posture damage. You can throw that on and actually get decent poise damage even with using Claws, but that being said, we're mainly using the successive attacks and bleed. Yeah, these are something you're going to want to check out. Definitely check out Claws, give them a shot. Bloodhound's Claws are great. We have them heavy affinity with Bloodflame Blade, any seal for buffs. We have the Raptor's Black Feathers, you don't really need it. White Mask, Lord of Blood's Exaltation, Ritual Swords Talisman, Listen's Prosthesis, Rotten Wing Sword Insignia, Thorny Tear, Faith Tear. And then for stats, we have 60 Vigor, 21 Mind, 25 Endurance, 75 Strength, which is really good for this because I don't think you get the two-handed bonus here, so we're going to need decently high Strength. 20 Dexterity, 25 Faith, Faith Tear, Golden Vow, Flame Grant Me Strength, Bloodflame Blade. At number 16, we have Bloodhound's Fang, an incredibly reliable weapon. We talked a lot about reliability in this video, but this is definitely one of the most reliable in terms of from early game to end game. Bloodhound's Fang can often carry many players. This is the one that you can grab in Limgrave, and you can get Bloodflame Blade early too. The other advantage here is you can use a ton of different greases and weapons buffs with Bloodhound's Fang, despite the fact that it's a somber weapon. And the invincibility frames that you get are a huge help too. You'll get a little bit of poise damage on the Ash of War as well. It's a huge advantage that you can use for so many different bosses to avoid getting hit. Yeah, getting those invincibility frames, being able to essentially dodge boss attacks while using the powerful Ash of War Bloodhound's Finesse, it really is phenomenal. Definitely grab Bloodflame Blade. You can get a lot of bleed build up too. This is a strong one. Let's jump into equipment. For equipment, we have Bloodhound's Fang, preferably plus 10. Any seal will work for buffs. We have the Raptor's Black Feathers, White Mask, Shard of Alexander, Dragoncrest Great Shield Talisman, Melissen's Prosthesis, Rotten Wing Sword Insignia, Thorny Tear, Fate Tear. Let's jump into stats. And for stats, this is a quality weapon. At 34 strength, we're going to have around 51 strength. We have 60 dexterity, 25 faith with the Faith Tear, 60 vigor, Golden Vow, Flame Grant Me Strength, and Bloodflame Blade for buffs. At number 15, we have Bleed and Frost. Now, Bleed and Frost may be upgraded directly by using Bleed and Bleed, but that being said, running two status effects and running a Bleed and Frost build can be a lot of fun too. Yeah, out of the two, personally, I have more fun, more enjoyment using Bleed and Frost. I find it a little bit more challenging than running pure Bleed, plus you have the ability to proc two different status effects, which is a little bit more exciting in my opinion than just having one with Bleed and Bleed. That being said, Bleed and Bleed is definitely a direct upgrade and can do more damage and DPS. This is why it cracks the top 20 but not the top 10 for me, because technically speaking there is a direct upgrade. If you go for Bleed and Bleed, you're going to get more damage for sure, but that being said, run a Bleed and Frost build if you're looking for an enjoyable build that's a little bit different. I really do like Bleed and Frost. In a second here, we're going to go over equipment, stats, and everything you need to know. For equipment, we have one Scavenger Curve Sword on the Colt with Seppuku, one in Cold Affinity with Chilling Mist, using the Dragon Communion Seal, White Mask, Raptor's Black Feathers, Claw Talisman, Rotten Wing Sword Insignia, Lord of Blood's Exaltation, Melissen's Prosthesis, Thorny Tear, Faith Tear. Let's jump into stats. And for stats on this one, we've invested a lot in Arcane because we have the one on a Colt, so we have 70 Arcane, 60 Vigor, 20 Mind, 26 Endurance, we have 20 Dexterity, and for buffs we're using Golden Vow and Flame Grant Me Strength. And at number 14, we have the Reduvia, a really popular dagger. If you run two of these, or if you just run an offhand dagger in Blood, you can get a lot of bleed build up, successive attacks, and Bloodblade is really good too, the Ash of War. This is definitely a good one to try out if you're trying to get quick bleed build up. Daggers are definitely good in Eldenring, and though they have short reach, you can get so much bleed build up and successive attack damage. Let's jump into equipment. For equipment, we have two Reduvias, or one Reduvia and a dagger in Blood. Any seal for buffs, White Mask, Rotten Wing Sword Insignia, Lord of Blood's Exaltation, Shard of Alexander, Ritual Swords Talisman, Thorny Tear, Faith Tear. Let's jump into stats. And for stats, we have 60 Vigor, 20 Mind, 26 Endurance, 40 Dexterity, 45 Arcane, and we're using Golden Vow and Flame Grant Me Strength. At number 13, we have Royal Knight's Resolve on the Giant Crusher. This one, for me, if you're going to buff this one up like crazy, it definitely cracks the top 10, but since for most of these we use 2 or 3 buffs in the tier, and we're going for 60 Vigor, I'm going to put it at number 13. It's a really good weapon, though. It does have short reach on the jump attacks, but overall it has one of the highest ARs in the game. Physical damage is incredible. For this, we have the Giant Crusher in Fire Affinity with Royal Knight's Resolve. We're using the Golden Vow, Ash of War, any seal for buffs, although I think we're just using Flame Grant Me Strength. Ritual Swords Talisman, Fire Scorpion Charm, Axe Talisman, Erdtree's Favorite +2, Fire Tier. We have the Spike Crack Tier. Let's jump into stats. And for stats, I think I actually meant to have 66 strength on this one, so you would have 99 when you two-hand it with the 1.5 times strength bonus. We have 31 endurance, 60 vigor, we have 25 mind, we have 15 faith, and we're using Golden Vow and Flame Grammy Strength to buff this. And the next one up here at number 12, we have Marais Executioner Sword. Now, as I mentioned, I'm on New Game Plus 7 for all of the footage here, and for that reason, I'm going to put this one outside the top 10, but again, buffed up, it would probably make the top 10. It's just a little bit on the slower side if you want to fully charge this weapon for me. Some of the faster bosses in the game can be made really difficult with it. Again, I use 2 buffs, sometimes 3, and a tier for most of these, trying to keep them at 60 vigor and mostly 51 poise. For that reason, I'm keeping it outside the top 10. Yeah, maybe it's just me, but with some of the quicker bosses, this one's definitely hard to use. That being said, fully charged, it does a lot of damage, and when you land it, the payoff is really rewarding because you get so much successive attack damage and a good amount of physical damage. In a second here, we're going to go over equipment, everything you need to know. For equipment, we have Marais Executioner Sword plus 10. We're using the Dragon Communion Seal because we have Arcane. We hit 51 poise, Shard of Alexander, Godfrey Icon, Rotten Wing Sword Insignia, Melissen's Prosthesis, Faith Tier, Thorny Tier. Let's talk about stats for this one. For stats, we have 60 Vigor, 22 Mind, 25 Endurance, 40 Strength. When we're two-handing it, we're getting to 60, 20 Dexterity, 25 Faith with the Faith tier. We have Soft Cap of 45 Arcane, and we're using Golden Vow and Flame Grammy Strength to buff this. The next one up here at number 11, I moved a couple things around for this big video, is Comet Azur. Now, Comet Azur, or Comet Azur, however you say it, it's really powerful, but it works mostly for standing targets. It has to be somewhere around the top 10 because the damage ceiling on it might be the greatest in the game. It has incredible damage, but that being said, any of the moving bosses in the game, any of the quicker bosses are going to be a little bit difficult with Comet Azur. I do listen to feedback, that's why I ended up removing this one from the top 10 and putting it just outside the top 10 because the damage on it is great, but as people mentioned, Ancient Dragon Lightning Strike and some other stuff is definitely better because it works best for standing targets. We have the Carian Regal Scepter, but Lucett's Staff would be great. We're using Golden Vow, Ash of War, Jellyfish Shield. We did hit 51 poise. We have the Graven Mask Talisman, Graven School Talisman, Magic Scorpion Charm, Ritual Swords Talisman, Cerulean Hidden Tier, Magic Tier. Let's jump into stats. For stats, we have 60 Vigor, 25 Mind, 20 Endurance and 20 Strength, 15 Dexterity, 70 Intelligence. We're using Comet Azur and then Terra Magica and the Golden Vow, Ash of War. At number 10, we have Ancient Dragon Lightning Strike, which is an incredibly powerful incantation. You can even one-shot stuff on horseback. The fact that you can cast this on horseback is incredible, and it does a ridiculous amount of damage. And down goes the dragon. Now, I did buff first. I end up going into a emote here. I didn't realize when you're using the sitting emote, by the way, that you can't open your inventory. I guess I never tried. Anyways, we're going to go into equipment, stats, everything you need to know for this one in a second, but it can be casted on horseback, and it does a crazy amount of damage, especially to big targets like dragons. Alright, for equipment for this one, we had 2 Gravelstone Seals. You can use one in the Jellyfish Shield. The Jellyfish Shield is 5% more. You can hit 51 poise with this amount of endurance. Phlox Canvas Talisman, Lightning Scorpion Charm, Ritual Shield, and Sword Talisman, Lightning Tier, Fate Tier. Let's jump into stats. And for stats, I didn't respec, by the way, from the Sacred Relic Sword, so you can take about 9 points out. You can get to probably about 80 Faith, and then we have 60 Vigor, 25 Mind, 26 Endurance. We're using Golden Vow, Howl the Shabriri, and then Ancient Dragon Lightning Strike, and a good secondary is Lightning Spear. And at number 9, we have one of the most reliable Ashes of War in the entire game, doing magic damage, frost damage, and a little bit of posture damage. This is probably one of my favorite, if not my favorite Ash of War in the entire game, and that is Ice Spear. Ice Spear is truly incredible. It's something you definitely should try out. It also has dexterity, intelligence, and AR scaling to a degree, so keep in mind you can run this on a Keen Guardian Sword Spear or Magic Sword Spear and still get a ton of damage. This one is absolutely ridiculous in terms of how much you can do with it too, and the Sword Spear is a really versatile weapon. This might actually be one of the builds that I bring into DLC because I feel like it's going to be reliable no matter what. Having that poise damage, the magic damage, the frost, it's just great all around. And people ask, Matt, what are your favorite Ashes of War and builds? Well, my 2 favorite regular Ashes of War definitely are Ice Spear and Bloodblade, and as far as builds go, I'm definitely going to go with Faith. As far as DLC goes, I think I might run with Faith too, because you end up with 3 different damage types for incantations. But have no doubts, this is going to be one that I consider running for the DLC too. I'm going to write down a whole bunch of different things. As we get closer, I'm sure we're going to get some more information on resistances and stuff. That's why I did some Holy for this one as well, to see if that ends up being any good. We're going to jump into equipment and stats here in a second. And yeah, this is one you're going to want to run on a Keen build for some versatility, and then if you want to run it as a Magic or Cold build, that can get a lot of damage that way too. We have it in Magic Affinity with Ice Spear, any Staff for Terra Magica, any Seal for buffs. We have 51 poise. We have the Shard of Alexander, Magic Scorpion Charm, Ritual Swords Talisman, Ritual Shield Talisman, Faith Tier, Magic Tier. Let's talk about stats for this one. And for stats, we have 60 Vigor, 23 Mind, 20 Endurance, 16 Strength and 16 Dexterity, 60 Intelligence, 33 Faith with a Faith tier. We're using Golden Vow, Hellish Shabriri, and Terra Magica to buff this. In number 8, we have another personal favorite, and that's Lion's Claw. Now, throughout this entire video, we talked a lot about reliability because we're using a couple of buffs, and we're keeping 60 Vigor and 51 Poise for most of these. As far as most of the bosses in the game, they're going to take great damage from Guts, Greatsword, and Lion's Claw. If you're curious or wondering why I'm choosing Guts Greatsword over Giant Crusher, it's because I like the additional range. Giant Crusher kind of has a mini Lion's Claw on the charged attack anyway. Also, I wanted to say I have an early game Guts Greatsword guide. I'll attach that in the description below. Let's jump into equipment. For equipment, we have the big Greatsword, Guts Greatsword, and Heavy Affinity with Lion's Claw. Any seal for buffs, we have 51 Poise, Green Turtle Talisman, Ritual Swords Talisman, Earthtree Favorite +2, Shard of Alexander, Stone Barb Crack tier, Faith tier. Let's jump into stats. And we have 60 Vigor, we have 99 Strength when we're two-handing it, 25 Mind, 30 Endurance, we have 25 Faith with the Faith tier, Golden Vow, and Flame Grant Me Strength. And at number 7, we have Mohgwyn Sacred Spear, another one that you kind of need to stand still to use, especially to get through all 3 animations of the Ash of War, but it doesn't really matter in the end at all because it does so much damage to so many of the bosses in the game, doing massive fire damage and a ridiculous amount of bleed build-up too. For a lot of people, this is top 5. The only reason I have it outside the top 5 for me is that you have to stand through all 3 animations of the Ash of War, which is relatively long, and if you get hit during that, you'll end up losing the last one, which is probably the best one of the 3. That being said, it's definitely a boss destroyer. I've had some clips in this game where I go through basically one animation, well, not one animation, but one use of the Ash of War and completely destroy a boss's entire HP bar. Any weapon that can do that is certainly overpowered, no question about it. Let's jump into equipment for this one. For equipment, we have Mohgwyn Sacred Spear +10. We're using the Dragon Communion Seal because it scales with Arcane, so why not? White Mask, we have the Shard of Alexander, Lord of Blood's Exaltation, Ritual Swords Talisman, Fire Scorpion Charm, Fire tier, Faith tier. Let's jump into stats for this build. And for stats, I had only 25 Strength and 60 Arcane. The reason for that is because the Ash of War scales primarily with Arcane for both fire damage and the bleed build-up. We did have 60 Vigor, 22 Mind, and for our buffs, we were using Golden Vow and Flame Grant Me Strength. And at number 6, we have what I would call a fantastic weapon in Death's Poker. It does a lot of magic damage, a lot of frost build-up. It's incredibly reliable, has a little bit of a longer animation, not nearly as long as Mohgwyn Sacred Spear, but that being said, it's totally worth the payoff because the damage is insane. For this one, we opted for Golden Vow, Hellish Shabriri, and Terra Magica because it's pure magic damage. You're going to get a huge boost there, and the Frost build-up is crazy good. You're pretty much anything that's not immune to Frost, you're probably going to proc Frost with Death's Poker. If you haven't tried out this weapon, despite the descaling, the Ash of War scales entirely with your intelligence stats, so don't worry about anything else if you're using the Ash of War. Let's jump into equipment. For equipment, we have Death's Poker, preferably +10, any Staff for Terra Magica, any Seal for buffs. We hit 51 Poise, actually 61. Shard of Alexander, Magic Scorpion Charm, Ritual Swords Talisman, Dragoncrest Great Shield Talisman. Then we have the Magic tier, Faith tier. Let's jump into stats for this one. For stats, we have 60 Vigor, 21 Mind, 27 Endurance, 17 Strength, 20 Dexterity, 50 Intelligence. At number 5, we have the Darkmoon Greatsword. Now, the Darkmoon Greatsword is probably one of the most FP-friendly weapons, spells, etc. in the entire game. It costs very minimal FP to activate it, and then afterwards, for a minute, you can keep sending out beams that are pure magic damage. It also does something like 20 or 30, I think it's around 30 stance damage per beam, which is huge. You don't get a ton of frost buildup on the ranged attacks. The Gargoyle here would be immune anyways, but if you're up close, you can also get decent frost buildup too. On my DLC catch-up guide, I covered the top 8 weapons, basically the same weapons more or less, but I also went over which weapons to grab and which quest lines to do. Make sure you do Ranni's quest line before the DLC because you're going to want the Darkmoon Greatsword, and it's a great quest line in general. In a second here, we're going to jump into equipment. For equipment, we have the Darkmoon Greatsword, preferably +10. Any staff will do for Terra Magica, any seal for buffs. The Spellblade set will boost this. Shard of Alexander, Magic Scorpion Charm. The Godfrey icon, it is chargeable. Ritual Swords Talisman, Magic tier, Faith tier. Let's jump into stats for this one. And for stats, we have 60 Vigor, 22 Mind, 20 Endurance, 16 Strength, 17 Dexterity, 33 Faith with the Faith tier. That'll add my levels up to 160 with the Faith tier. We have 60 Intelligence. We're using Golden Vow, Hellish Rebury, and Terra Magica to buff this. And number 4, we have the Gargoyle's Twinblades, which are really good for bleed build-up, a nice strength and arcane weapon. That being said, I can pretty much categorize all the Twinblades in this section because Twinblades and the jump attacks are incredible for bleed damage and successive attack damage. Now, I like curved swords over Twinblades, but that being said, all the jump attack bleed builds are ridiculous. For this, we have 2 Gargoyle Twinblades in Blood Affinity, and we have the Dragon Communion Seal, White Mask, Raptor's Black Feathers, Claw Talisman, Rotwing Sword Insignia, Ritual Swords Talisman, Lord of Blood's Exaltation. Then we have the Faith tier, Thorny tier. Let's jump into stats. I want to state that you can use the Ritual Swords Talisman instead of Melissen's Prosthesis if you only have one of the two. For our stats, we have 60 Vigor, 22 Mind, 25 Endurance, 40 Strength, 45 Arcane, 15 Faith, 25 Faith with the Faith tier, and we're using Golden Vow and Flame Remy Strength. The next one up here, ahead of Twinblades, is the Scavenger Curved Swords. I really like the Scavenger Curved Swords around between 125 and 150 because you don't have to split your damage stats and you can simply just pump up Arcane, which makes them very useful when you're in the meta range. And if you're wondering why I cap at 150, there's a lot of reasons for that. One, it's really challenging at 150 on New Game Plus 7, and 2, the other reason is about a third of my audience or so, roughly around 30%, maybe 35%, does PvP as well, so it gives them the option to try out these builds as well as PvP builds. Yeah, I guess when people came back, I got a lot of comments like, why aren't you level 300 or 500 or something? But because by then, it's not really a build. It's just you having all the stats to do anything in the game, and then, yeah, you can put whatever talismans and buffs, and there's some build aspects, but it's just not the same because you're just overpowered pretty much all the time. By the way, if you noticed, I've had a cold. I've been losing my voice towards the end of this video, even though I did this in a couple of sessions. This one took a while to make, but yeah, I seem to be losing my voice a little bit, so apologies there. We're going to go into stats, equipment, everything you need to know for this one. For equipment, we have 2 Scavenger Curved Swords on a Colt with Seppuku. We're using the Dragon Communion Seal, White Mask, Raptor's Black Feathers, Rotten Wing Sword Insignia, Melissen's Prosthesis, Lord of Blood's Exaltation, Claw Talisman, Thorny tier, Faith tier. Let's jump into stats. For stats, we have 60 Vigor, 20 Mind, 26 Endurance, 20 Dexterity only, and then we have 15 Faith, 25 with the Faith tier, 70 Arcane. We don't have to split stats, Golden Vow, and Flame Remy Strength. And we're getting close to the finale here. At number 2, to no surprise to anyone, we have Night Comet. You probably know what number 1 is as well. It does massive damage, Night Comet. It has incredible range, and it's chargeable too. Anyone that uses Night Comet will tell you Night Comet is probably the most broken spell to build around in the entire game. It's truly ridiculous. Even the Gargoyles here on New Game Plus 7, who are normally difficult, are made quite easy with the power of Night Comet. If you're wondering why I died and why my runes are there, originally this was supposed to be a clip. This was from another video I did. It was supposed to be a clip for the Darkmoon Greatsword. However, that didn't work out as well. I switched to Night Comet and then ended up getting it first try because Night Comet is just absurd. And this Gargoyle is going to go down in no time, no problems here. Night Comet, by the way, is definitely an effective method for taking down one of the hardest duo boss fights in the entire game, in my opinion. I actually can't stand this fight. I find them very, very difficult most times for most builds. In a second here, we're going to go over equipment, stats, everything you need to know. For equipment, we have 2 Stabs of Loss, or 1 on Jellyfish Shield is good. Upgrade the one you're casting with. Any seal for buffs. Godfrey Icon, Magic Scorpion Charm, Ritual Swords Talisman, Graven Mask Talisman, Magic Tier, Faith Tier. Let's talk about stats. For stats, we have 50 Vigor, 70 Intelligence, 33 Faith with the Faith tier. We're using Golden Vow, Hellish Rebury, Night Comet, and Terra Magica to buff this. And at number 1, we have the most reliable and powerful weapon, in my opinion, in the entire game, and that's the Blasphemous Blade, healing you on each hit with the Ash of War, on top of the fact that it does massive fire damage, and it's a Faith build for versatility, makes it insanely good. If you're ever having a hard time with the main base game, and I know DLC is going to be different because it looks like some of the bosses are going to be pretty fire resistant, the Blasphemous Blade can carry you through the entire main game with ease. It's really not hard to run through the whole game with this weapon, even here on New Game Plus 7. If you're stuck at any late game boss, literally any late game boss that's not fire resistant, so pretty much really the only one out there is the Fire Giant, who has around 50% fire resistance. The rest of the bosses you can pretty much walk through the end game with the Blasphemous Blade. Yeah, definitely try this one out. Having a hard time, having a difficult time, get in the massive fire damage, get in the healing, and within a couple tries or so, even if you're having difficulty, you'll get used to the Ash of War, and I'm sure you're going to have no issues whatsoever. The Blasphemous Blade makes the game much easier. And while many will refer to this as turning Eldenring into a successful L2 simulator, as I've probably mentioned in my videos before, it doesn't really matter much. If you're the more exploring type, if you don't want a crazy hard time, then the Blasphemous Blade, there's no reason not to turn to this weapon. It can help you for sure. Yeah, this is going to be number one for me until DLC comes around, and when DLC comes around, which by the way I'm super hyped for, I cannot wait. That trailer looked amazing. I've watched it probably 10-15 times now. I think fire is going to be less useful. Let's jump into equipment. For equipment, we have the Blasphemous Blade plus 10, the Urchery Seal or Giant Seal will go well with this. We hit 51 poise, Ritual Shield Talisman, Fire Scorpion Charm, Ritual Sword Talisman, Shard of Alexander, Fire Tier, Faith Tier. Let's jump into stats. For stats, we have 60 Vigor, 22 Mind, 24 Endurance, 20 Strength, 15 Dexterity, 70 Faith. Our buffs are Golden Vow and Hellish Rebiri. Since it's pure fire damage, Hellish Rebiri will end up giving you 5% more damage. And thanks for watching this one. I really appreciate everybody that's been subbing to this point. If you're not subbed at this point, but you like my videos, be sure to hit that subscribe button because we're going to be doing a ton of Elden Ring content before, during, and even after DLC. Elden Ring is undoubtedly my favorite game of all time. I've had more fun than I can even explain with Elden Ring. This community has been awesome, by the way. In the pinned comment below, there's the Discord, so be sure to join that too. I'll catch everybody soon and see you at my channel.